Hey, folks, welcome back to The Pulse. It is Friday. It's Stephen Friday once again. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat, and this is Right Side Up. It is 11 o'clock Central Texas time, and I am glad that you're here. I don't know about you, but are there things that you do consistently? This is probably one of the most consistent things I've ever done in my entire life, and it's all thanks to Steve and Jesus. So, this is a unique time in my channel because, we talk about I think some of the most important things in life. And it has been resonating significantly with many, many folks. And I just want to share a personal story this morning because this is just so cool. I had a tough morning this morning, just being honest with you. And of course, where I get challenged the most is my emotions. And there are different people with different approaches and different personalities. And we're going to hear about that today. But here's the crazy thing. So, what I do when I prepare for the stream is I ask Jesus what I need to share. And it was weird this morning because I had such a difficult morning and I was really kind of out of sorts. And I literally was like, all right, what am I going to do? And I went into my channel to review stuff. And I just, I thought, oh, let me look at what episode 29 was. And I fat fingered it right on the keyboard and I typed in 28 and I literally stopped. I was like, okay, am I supposed to do that? So I looked at 28 and it blew my mind. And I want to tie that in with another story. This is, I think that this right side up is for me for this morning. And I'm hoping that it also is for you. Um, there are all kinds of challenges. And Steve speaks to exactly what I dealt with this morning. And it was such an encouragement to me. And so here's the second story. The second story is I've been talking to Jesus, right? I've been talking to him and, you know, it's amazing. He said to me the other day, because I'm really interested in physics. We've talked about this on the channel before, but I'm really interested in this idea that when we observe something, it collapses the waveform. We've talked about that before, the double slit experiment that's based literally on who we are and our observation. That's the essence and the background of quantum computing, is that in its, basically matter and things are in their super state until they're observed, which is essentially how we build games. They render when we observe them, right? We get close to it and it renders. Well, it shows that we are in partnership with the creation, which is ultimately, the Bible says all things were created for him and by him. That's Jesus himself. And so I'm asking him about this, and he says, I am the God of the quantum. And I literally just like, certain things that might not resonate with you, but it resonated with me. And I literally said, so you're actually interested in every decision, every moment, every single thing? The things that I think you ought not be interested in, you're interested in? And he's like, I'm in all things. And I'm like, wow. So our partnership with him in the very construct of this creation is that we observe it with him. And this concept of with is so powerful when you think of it at that level that scientists are looking into this and going, hey man, like it doesn't become something until you observe it. And you're like, so that means this partnership with who we are in the context of creation is actually co-creating with Jesus. And it's like, well, Steve talked to me about the Elohim, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is more complex than I ever not thought about, but also more simple. So I hope this is a huge blessing to you today because this like literally reads my mail, strikes me right between the eyes, and it's just dynamite. So welcome back. I'm glad you're here this Friday. It's become a special time. Mike Ostell is number one, as he typically is. Mike, it's so good to see you. Mike is a great friend of Steve Staggs as well. Good morning, Matt, and the RSU buddies. There's a reason we are all here today. And that's the amazing thing when you see Jesus as the Jesus or the God of the quantum, you go, there are no accidents, and you're like, wow, we do this with him to the point where we literally observe it and it renders it. The waveform collapses. Sam Kemp is here. He's working on Texas, and boy, I tell you what, Texas Independence is heating up, my friends. And I appreciate you stopping by to say hello. Dan McMillan is here as well. Dan, thanks for coming here. Hope you had a great hunting trip this last week, I believe. So it's great to have you here. Timothy Harris, what's up, man? Good to welcome back. It's good to see you. And Stella, good to see you as well. 38 people here now. We've had upwards of 160 people on Right Side Up, so I'm sure this will grow as things get out into the world of Twitter, because Twitter is really where we've been growing dramatically. So, folks, let's jump into this content. I've entitled this emotional damage because I was dealing with some emotional damage, and it commonly for us in the human experience, if you're someone like me who is sensitive to the human emotions, you get drawn off sides very easily because you're controlled by them. And for me to like stumble across this is only divinely appointed. And I so hope that this is a blessing to you. So let's jump into it right now. Folks, Steve Staggs sharing an amazing message today.
Um, there is a certain hierarchy within the kingdom of darkness that um, exists because that's how God created the hierarchy of the angelic realm. There is a hierarchy in His creation. It's not like the way we think of hierarchy. We think of hierarchy as the ones on top get to tell everybody else what to do, and that's not the way it works. The hierarchy is designed to deal with different levels within the creation. Um, and so in in that area, we've heard, if we use New Testament terms like um, evil spirit, um, Honoria Nomadicus, we hear of unclean spirits. Anyway, these are the lowest levels within Satan's realm, and their express task is to attack people at the base nature of where they live. So they'll attack desires, attitudes, physical traits. Uh, and their whole intention is to get us to the place where we're thinking more about us than anything else. We become the center of the universe. And of course, as parents, we know that, you know, that old adage that eventually you have to tell your children is, hey, you're not the center of the universe. Well, I wonder how many of us as adults has grown out of that point of view, and to my experience, not many of us. But that's the intention. The intention is to make sure we're at the center of the universe because that's how the culture of the world under Satan's rule works. No matter how you package it, man has to be at the center of that. If man is not at the center of that, it doesn't work. And so we can get into that at some point if you like. Um, and so that's how it is designed and structured. So that's part one. Part two, think now strategically. Um, if you were a member um, of the police force, or you were head of the U.S. military, would you send your troops to police or to keep in line your allies or citizens who were law abiding? Is that where you would direct your resources?
No.
No. You would direct your resources to those who are posing a threat, whether they're in the form of nations for armies or if they're in the form of citizens who are rebellious and lawbreakers, at the citizenry level. So my point is that Satan does not dispatch his military resources to people who are not a threat to him. He only, because he has limited resources, so he's going to direct those resources. Okay, next, so that's second level. Third level, where is he going to direct and to whom is he going to direct? Well, there are going to be people who are in their circumstances because of the life choices they have made. And so Satan doesn't need to mess with you one bit. You're already doing a fine job of screwing up your life. He's not going to mess with you. He may exploit you, he may use you at a point in time, but he's not going to expend any of his precious resources to deal with you. So learning how to step out of a situation, we'll come back to that in just a minute because you and I talked about it on Monday, Beth, is the reason for that. And the why is, why the heck am I here? Am I here because, and once again, this is kind of the opening introduction to the 60s white paper. Am I here because of the choices I made? Because I'm making really stupid choices? And so I'm simply bearing the harvest of the decisions I've made in the past, that this is what I have sown in the field of my life. And so this is the fruit I'm bearing. And these are really horrible decisions. I should not have taken that gun, that neutral device, and put it in some guy's head and then stolen his wallet. That was a bad decision. And so now I'm in a lot of trouble for that. Well, guess what? This has nothing to do with demonic forces. You're wrecking your life all by yourself. And because you are willing to do that, if necessary, you'll be called upon to act on behalf of and as an agent of that kingdom if it needs to take care of business with somebody. And if you think that's just a philosophical statement, it's because you're not in the game. You don't understand how absolutely real and meticulously involved in human affairs that the kingdom of darkness is. Okay, down to pennies. Now, on the other hand, there are people who are actually trying to get their life turned around, trying to do what's right. They may not even be trying to do anything that Jesus is saying because they've never even been exposed to that idea, but they're still trying to get their life right somehow, some way, and they just can't get there. Well, that's a person who is a truth seeker who represents a very real threat to the kingdom of darkness. And there will be all kinds of things that can come up to deal with that. So thus the need to step back and say, okay, why is this going on? There is a pattern that's happening that I need to observe in order to understand what is happening in my life and what is it that is creating this problem. You see? So the circumstance, not one thing that I've talked about is circumstance oriented. It's decision oriented from the person, from the inside out. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, and that's where creative processes then are released into the creation. All right. And if that is for purposes of good, you represent a potential threat, not because it's good, but because of where that good could lead. Right. We talked about, Whitney, for example.
Yeah.
Right. Whitney's a truth seeker. If she keeps asking the questions she's asking and she keeps on the path she's keeping on, she may be involved in some of the weirdest garbage that the planet can ever muster up. But if she keeps asking the question, keeps seeking what is true, she's going to end up headlong, face to face with Jesus, who's going to say, hey, glad you finally showed up. You want to know more? Would you like to know how this thing actually works? You've been seeking, you're about to find. Are you interested? Okay? Why? Well, that is the intolerable risk that exists for everyone who is actually seeking to do what is true. Okay? So, guess what? Now, as long as we stay in that circumstance, and as long as we only look at the circumstance in the present moment of what it's doing, we'll just be like a guy tied to a pole. We'll just keep running in circles, digging a big old hole, thinking that something's happening or we're trying to get things done, but we're not going anywhere. But the person who will step outside of that thing, even if it's just in the form of declaring I'm stepping out, which, like for you, okay, did you eventually step out?
Yep.
Were you able to in the moment?
No.
What was important, that you weren't in the moment or that you actually ended up outside, stepping outside of it?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I would say the reason you were able to step outside is because you said, I'm going to step outside, whether I feel like I'm doing it now or not.
Yeah. No,
Issuing a decree of rulership.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's huge.
That's a long answer.
Well, one of the things we talk about a lot, I've told you many times, I've always been frustrated because I felt like I didn't get any practical, what can I do if I'm in this situation, practical stuff. And if there's anything we talk about, it's the practical,
Yes.
right? Like, hey, what can I do? Yes. Okay. So I want to repeat back to what I heard you say. One of the principal focuses of the system of darkness is to get you to focus on yourself, meaning man-centered, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that I'm most important and what I need and what I want is, and I think about that as, displayed as narcissism in some ways. And boy, do we have an entire scrolling population on phones that are literally feeding that, right? And so, okay, if I can get you to essentially see yourself as separate, right? Because we established at the beginning of this that this idea of with him, rule with him and his nature and character. Okay, so if that's why he created, then the adversary in the second part you said, why would I direct my resources at someone that's already quote unquote out of the game?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no point. It's already been effectively you're out. And so what I hear you saying in the practical terms is, if I'm just selfishly motivated, I believe that I'm the descendant of a monkey, and I am and this is the best it's going to get, and I just need to get mine. I'll step on your neck to do it. And I'm about amassing these things because if I can convince you that having more money is going to be fulfillment for you, or sex or drugs or whatever it is, or I can get you to the point where you're so beat down that all you can do is self-medicate, you're out of the game. So you're no threat to me. And so I've been effective in you being man-centered because
Yes.
you're now not focused on a God-centered with him rulership in his nature and character. So you're out. Congratulations, not in the game. The third thing you said is the decisions that you make day to day can get you into a bind. And of course, there's that term we use from the Bible that is the wages of sin is death, right? And I was thinking about this is we live with a harvest of these decisions. And the harvest term is great because you talk about a seed,
Yeah.
right? Like I make a decision. Yeah, I decide to take that gun and animate that gun. And I might have justified. I'm like, I think that this is the right reason because I need to get mine and I go and take from you. And of course, you're going to live with the consequences of those decisions. What's really fascinating to me is that so many people who have gotten into really difficult situations find themselves either in prison or at the end of themselves, or like the people who, go through 12-step programs or whatever. They're literally going, all right, I'm acknowledging that this is unmanageable by me. And I think that this fits so clearly into why that works
Yeah.
is because you kind of go, I've been trying to go my own way. And that's my story completely. I was convinced that I had all the skill and ability and talent to be able to take it the distance until I didn't.
Yeah.
And then all crumbled around me and but I had nothing. And it was almost like I had to take all the air out of the room for you to notice that I'm here.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's how it felt. It's like, okay, because if the air's out of the room, you're not thinking about scrolling on your phone, right? You're looking at how do I get some air? So what I think is incredible about this is you gave this practical application at the end of that. And you asked me that question, like, what did you do and how did you do it? Would you speak about this idea of whether it's verbally or not, telling them to stop? Because what in my mind I see is Neo in the movie when he finally recognizes who he is.
Yeah.
He literally looks around, flexes his muscles, the walls go brrr, right? And you think about who he is. He is the one
Yeah.
that has power over the Matrix, the creation. He has a role. And all the agents shoot their bullets and they come slow, and he literally says, no. It seems like what you're suggesting is that functionally actually is true, that you have this ability, and it says no temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God will give you a way out that you can stand up underneath it, which I think is an amazing picture. Like whenever you think about standing up underneath like a tent and pushing it up and saying no, is that what you're saying? That you literally in the midst of this, when you understand, am I operating with him in his nature and character? No, definitely wasn't, Steve. Well, guess what? You can step out and you can say no to this.
Yeah.
What are you saying no to, Steve?
Yeah, great. For those who have spent any time in church or Sunday school or read the Bible at all, they'll be familiar with the statement that Jesus made to one of the disciples about letting your yes be yes and your no be no, and all else besides is evil, is the way Jesus described it. And so we're basically taught that what Jesus is telling us is that we need to be truthful people. When we say something, we need to mean it. Well, sort of. But when, eventually got, for me personally, it was like, wait a minute, it's just one of these Mark IV kinds of situations where he's teaching what appears to be a very basic lesson, but he's got more up his sleeve. Well, what he has up his sleeve when he's talking about this, that the only way you get is by talking to him about it. What did you mean when you said you need to let your yes be yes and your no be no, and all else besides is evil? Duh, that seems pretty flippin' basic. Who doesn't know that? So, what do you got up your sleeve, Lord? What do you think? What were you actually saying? And out of that kind of a conversation, you'll get things like, that's just so fascinating with Jesus. You'll start seeing things the way he sees it. Well, Steve, has anybody taught you, or have you ever thought that yes has a purpose and no, likewise, has a purpose? Well, I can't speak for anybody else, but I never got that deep into it.
Right.
And so it's like, well, no, what is it? He says, well, the purpose of yes is to empower so as to mobilize.
Okay.
The purpose of no is to protect. So, and what a person says is evidenced by what they do. So regardless of what a person says with their lips, their behavior will tell you whether it's a yes or no. If they say no, and yet they're empowering so as to mobilizing the very thing they've said no to, guess what they've actually said? They said yes. I cannot tell you how that simplified my life. In dealing in the business environment and other people that I was around, I stopped listening entirely to what they said. I listened to the extent of their behavior. And we've seen that before, right? Don't listen to what I say, watch what I do, kinds of things. So we have some awareness of this. So when you stand up and you say no to something, what you're doing is you're protecting. You understand that the reason you are saying that is because you are protecting something that is about to be exploited. So in the conversations on Monday, it was no, they don't get to. Remember that discussion?
Yep.
Nope, they don't get to rule. That isn't how this was. This is not how this is played. No, they don't get to rule. Period. What are you doing? You're protecting rulership.
Yeah.
You're not transferring or giving standing to something that is trying to hijack your ability and authority to rule. That's what's actually the game that's being played. They have no standing to rule, and now they're trying to get it from you by getting you to submit to the attack on your emotions so that you'll yield to the emotions. So what is then ruling? Your emotions. No, emotions are very true. They're very accurate. They tell you what's going on. They just don't get to rule. They are granted authority to inform, but they don't have the authority to rule.
Okay, stop there. That's humongous. Okay, so I think this is probably one of the most valuable practical applications, at least for me. I'm a student of personality types, right? And, one of the coolest things about the scriptures, and I've always loved this, is that, there are 4 gospels.
Yeah.
And it's just so cool in this 4 gospels. And of course, we hear all the different personalities of the disciples as well. But, right there in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we've talked about this before, but it's interesting that you go back to Hippocrates, which is like the father of medicine, right? If you look back, 3,000 years or whatever, the origins of someone on this planet going, hey, people are different. No kidding. And there were 4 different kind of personality types of that era, right? Just saying, hey, there's different people. And of course, you see in modern psychology, Carl Jung and others who are like, hey, there's kind of some categories to this. Well, I've been a student of that, and also paid attention to people in teams, right? And so I think they're good vocabulary to kind of help you understand. But somebody said to me, they said, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
And of course, I always think about here I'm in Central Texas, and, we had football tonight, right? Friday night lights. And I think about these guys that are and we've got coaches like this. And I was at a breakfast this morning for my sons. They finished their season, middle school football. And one of the coach's sons, the coach himself is probably 325 pounds of muscle.
Wow.
And his son, everyone knows, hates football. His son is the biggest kid on the team. And everyone knows that his father is making him play football. And he got up in front and got his little award. And the coach said, everybody knows this boy hates football. And isn't that interesting? His father is making him play football.
Yeah.
And, the example is this: I was in theater all my life, and it's like your dad is, alpha male football player, and, he, puts a football in the crib and, plays rough with the boy. And then once the boy gets to a certain age, he's like, I just want to dance, Dad. And you're like, right? He's like, okay, so there are different personalities here. And I think what's really cool about the Gospels is we see Matthew, which starts with this lineage, right? It starts with this, hey, we need to connect to historical, if this doesn't connect back to literally Adam himself, right? If we can't tie this back to David, if we can't show that historically that this guy Jesus is the Messiah, you're not going to prove it to me. And so you've got this perspective of a back looking, or, historically, you've got Mark, who's as quick and dirty as you get. And then you've got Luke, which is the most fascinating to me. And I've met so many people like this in my life who are very rational people.
Yeah.
And we see them in business a lot. You look at a guy like Steve Jobs and you don't see an accountant. You look at a guy like Steve Jobs and you don't see, honestly, a CEO. You see an artist, creative. And what's interesting is when I see leadership, I see people who are wired for facts and figures and data. And of course, what does it say? If you look at the introduction to Luke, it's literally, he was commissioned to give the accurate account. And I love it that it's here we have juxtaposed against 3 other gospels, a rational doctor who says, all right, these bozos, they told you the wrong story. I'm going to tell you the right story. And it's so classic with those who make decisions based on their thinking.
Yeah.
And then you've got this guy, John. The word became flesh and dwelt among us. I mean, this narrative of all narrative, this journey of hijinks, and it's the greatest, I don't know, supervillain story that exists, right? And what I love about that is that it acknowledges the fact that I'm somebody who loves the book of John, right? I appreciate the scriptures, but I am often led by the feelings and emotions. And I think there are people, whether you're the guy that's like, boy, you're going to play football, or you're just like, no, I'm on the creative side of this, and I literally wear my heart on my sleeve, and I am sensitive. Like Steve, all my life, when somebody was sick, I felt sick.
Yeah.
When I saw someone get injured, I felt injured.
Hmm.
I've had empathy, deep empathy, and I've had to fight it actually because it takes me like if I see an accident on the side of the road, like I literally, it's weight on me.
Wow.
And some people are like, maybe you shouldn't have been driving that fast. Like I know people in my life who, if somebody's crying, somebody broke a bone, and they've got it sticking out the side of their arm, are like, that kind of sucks to be you.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I know people like that. I cannot function that way, right?
Yeah.
So to bring this all home, and that was a long example of why I'm justifying my ridiculous behavior, is that no matter how we see the world, God has fashioned us since the beginning, right? Knew us, knit us together.
Yeah.
And there should be no better example with our uniquenesses and our experiences and our differences to understand that if we rule with him in the fullness of his nature and character, and that our yeses and nos are to bless and protect, when we align with that, it's this beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But we also have to be guarded, right? So my buddy who's like, maybe you shouldn't ride a motorcycle, man. But he's dead. Like he's pulled in pieces, and I'm like freaking out. And he's like, well, shouldn't have drove a motorcycle, buddy. There are people like that. And I go, how can you possibly see things that way? Well, that's how God created people. And you think about it and you go, okay, we need to have these practical tools. And one of the things you're saying, no matter how you're wired, stepping outside of something and letting your yes be your yes and your no being your no gives you the ability to do it with him.
Yes.
And I feel like my emotions that overtake me is the attack of me putting myself at the center, right? I'm going to let these things rule. I've given them permission to make me ineffective.
Yeah.
And I've given them that authority.
Yes, you have. And by the way, we all do. And hey, listen, nobody does this stuff on purpose with forethought.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my emotions are going crazy. Oh, sounds like a good idea to put them in charge. Let's do that. We don't think like that. We think we are being empathetic, or we are being concerned, or we're being, true to what's actually happening. I'm not going to be false. I'm going to be true. This is what's really happening, etc. Well, all of that is accurate. What is missing is the realization of what we are called and created to do, which is to be, one, to rule with Jesus in the fullness of his nature and character with him, and to be, in order to do that, and when we do that, that we're going to be bigger than the problem. So if there's a problem, my emotions may be informing me about the severity of the problem. They may be informing me about the target of the problem. They may be informing me about all kinds of valuable information that needs to be known and collected, because it's going to support the ruling effort. Well, that's not a negation of the importance and value of the emotions. It is to identify what the role of those emotions are in ruling. So likewise with the person who's much more sterile, there is going to come a point in time where there are circumstances where an incredibly sterile point of view is absolutely essential. Well, guess what? That is a form of emotional expression. I have none. I don't care to have any. I will seal off and cut off any emotional display. This is simply a calculation, and we will deal with it as if it were an equation. 1 + 1 = 2. Take away the 1 and you don't have the 2. Okay? You see where I'm going with all of this? And it's learning how, whatever it is, however it is that God has built us, that those are to support ruling with him, not to take over ruling apart from him,
Wow,
which
that's
is the whole
enormous.
exchange.
Yeah, that's enormous. And you think about it, I'm actually glad there are people like that because when they're actually ruling with him in his nature and character, I want that person in the midst of the wreck.
Yep.
Right? I
Yep.
want that person to say, "Nope, jaws of life, gotta take care of the situation." I got a buddy who's a trauma surgeon, and I'm like, "How in the world do you do it?" And he's like,
Yeah. Right
"Dude,
on.
all this plumbing's the same." That's what he says. He's like,
Yeah.
"All this plumbing's the same." I said, "Does it ever like" he's like, "No, I understand how it works and how it fits together." To me, I don't know what a pancreas looks like. I
Don't
just know
want to know.
mine doesn't work so good, but I know that but he does, and he knows where it is, and
Yep.
he's seen 100 of them
Yep.
or 1,000 of them, and I think what's really cool, though, is that God made people that way, and I'm glad that they are. I look at my wife who's a guardian. That's the terminology I would use for her, and I call her super mom. Why? Because she is concerned about blessing and protecting. I mean, nobody I know makes better decisions than my wife in blessing and protecting children, the family, the institutions of all that, but also, um, it's different. It's different for everyone. And I
Yep.
think what's so great is what you're saying is universal. It's
Yes.
not based on one personality or another. It's saying, hey, understanding who you are and how you can easily be drawn offside. So for me, it's an emotional thing. And I think about football. What are you trying to do with a hard count? You're trying to get the guys off sides. Why? Because I get 5 yards if I've got it. Well, if you want to come and attack me, Steve, it's on the emotional side of things,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so I think understanding how you're easily attacked or where your vulnerabilities are, I think is a wise thing to consider. But to know that with him and his nature and character, right? This idea of with him, because you said it right. You're just like, you may not have known that you were saying, I need to stop and step out of this, but that is what happened. But it sounds like the more that you understand this and practices it, that you can literally get to the point where you can see it and identify it almost as it's happening. Because I feel like I get overwhelmed by it versus going, oh, it's coming. No, because I think what that would material in my life would be people would be like, "Hey, wow, you're kind of calm in the storm." And that's what I see in you, Steve. Honestly, I see you calm in the storm. Is that personality or is that practice or both?
Well, it's both, but it's also positional. You know, um, I'll tell you. I'll just give you a little example. Um, I was going through a really rough time at one time. I mean, I've gone through a bunch of these over the course of my life. You can't be in the game without experiencing some competitive fodder along the way. Um, and so we were going through a really really tough time. And off in the distance, I saw this figure off in the distance. I couldn't make it out, didn't know what it was, but it looked like it was kind of a human form. So way way off in the spiritual distance. Um, and I looked at it, I watched it, and I watched it, and it started to come toward me. And as it got closer and closer, I recognized it as Jesus. And and he looked exactly the way John described him in Revelation 3, with the eye, with the eyes of fire and the bronze and the white hair. Looked exactly like that. And I thought, whoa, dude, the, John wasn't just making this stuff up. That is for real. And around him was a swirling whirlwind, um, devastating whirlwind that was around him. A raging windstorm was just swirling around him. And he was at perfect peace in this thing. And so I looked at him and watched him. And so finally, this happened over a couple of days, by the way. So finally, on the third day, I think it was on the third morning, I said, "Okay, Lord, you who are standing in the midst of the raging windstorm, what say you?"
Hmm.
And he said, "Come and stand with me in the midst of the storm."
Wow.
Who says that?
Well, Jesus clearly. Oh my God.
Wow. Come and stand with me in the midst of the raging windstorm. So I go to my wife. I say, "Marsh, here's what's going on. Here's what's happening. Here's what I asked Jesus. Here's what he said. What do you want to do?" You see the choice that is present? And she said, "I don't think we have a choice. I think we need to say yes." What is the purpose of yes? To empower so as to mobilize. And so he said, "Okay, Jesus, we'll come. We'll stand with you in the midst of the raging windstorm." And so, yeah, it's not only attitude and practice and things of that nature, it's also essentially positioning. He is not just described to be the peace in the midst of the storm. Wherever he goes, the reaction to him, and it's part of this proaction reaction thing we've talked about. Wherever he goes, he kicks up all kinds of reactions around him, every one of which is designed to try to create havoc and fear, to take what is orderly and turn it into disorder. By the way, not because Satan likes operating in disorder, he doesn't. His entire kingdom has to operate with precise order in order for it to function. It's just that he can't produce it because there is no order in him. And so the result of everything is this raging storm that he produces. And Jesus says, hey, just come and stand with me.
That's so big, Steve. It makes me think about him turning over the tables. It makes me think about him sleeping in the boat.
Yeah.
And it's like, you say that the swirling windstorm is actually potentially a product of him. That's an interesting, very, very counterintuitive thought for a lot of people. They think of meek and mild Jesus as, sitting with children, petting a lamb and, drinking tea or something. It's like he's passive. And what is interesting about this is all of these lessons that were taught by him when he was here were in the midst of very serious things, right?
Yes.
It seems like, death, storms and all of these things. And it's interesting that you say that because I'm thinking of whatever the challenge may be. It may be life and death, right? It may actually be like, hey, we're going to die in this storm, and why are you sleeping, right? And this is a tool and a means by which you're going to learn something. It could also be, hey, Steve, you got cancer. And you're like, holy crap! All right, Jesus, do we take this seriously? What do we do? And then you see the smiley face, which I think is so awesome. But it's like, hold on a second. Now I understand. Consider it pure joy, brothers, when facing troubles of many kind. What are those things if they are not opportunities, right? Opportunities to see things from his perspective.
Yeah.
Because in a way, you have no need to be in the center of it if there were no storm.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think that also and it makes things like, hey, follow me, make a lot more sense.
Well, hey, like I was sharing with you, and Ray, when we were joking around a little bit in the green room, it's one thing to sit in the stands and watch Nolan Ryan throw a ball under the chin of somebody and go, oh, wow, look at that. It's another to actually be the guy whose chin was buzzed by that 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Well, guess what? Guess what your choice is? Your choice is to get in the middle of the storm, or your choice is to observe the storm from a distance. Well, what do you want to do? There's a seat for both of us. What seat do you want to occupy? And, we have made these things so much about ideas and doctrines and teaching lessons and all of this stuff that we have forgotten that when Jesus stood in the garden and they came and the crowd, the 300 to 500 people came with clubs and mallets to come take him away, and they said, and he said, hey, who have you come for? And they said, Jesus. And he said, I am. And when he spoke those words, it knocked them all back on their butts. Now, what I want to know is who is the guy that thought it was a good idea to get up after being knocked on my keister to think I'm going to take this guy somewhere?
Right.
Who had that idea? It's like, well, wait a minute, guys. Did you just observe what this dude did? He simply answered the question and he knocked all of us on our keisters. What are we doing? Let's pause for a minute, step outside of this situation and say, okay, why are we here? And why did this guy just knock us on our butts? What are we about to get involved in here? We don't do that because the system of darkness works with us being at the center of everything. And so it doesn't matter what happens to us, as long as we remain in the center, it functions. The moment we get out of the center, we're a threat.
Wow.
And that's the game. Unless you have Jesus standing in front of Pilate.
Yeah.
Don't you know that I have the authority to free you or to crucify you? Pilate, you would have no authority over me if it was not first given to you from above.
Hmm.
I would start thinking about why he gave you that authority. And Satan, you the guy, hey, and I'm talking to the guy behind you, Pilate. Satan, I would give a second thought to this if I were you. Now you won't do it because you don't have any wisdom in you, but I would suggest you doing it because there's a whole lot of hurt that's about to happen. The storm, the raging windstorm that you've created around me is about to come home to roost. I'd be careful. No, he isn't. He doesn't know how to be. He has no wisdom in him. And so everything that Jesus says is a parable and a riddle to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Wow.
anyway,
How about them apples, folks? 100 people literally as soon as I turned that. Thanks so much for being here. What an amazing message. I call this one emotional damage because, I feel like that's the damage that I face. And I don't know about you, but I hope that this is a message that is empowering to you, because what I think is so amazing about the teaching of Steve Staggs and his mentorship of me is that it had like a double ring to it. On one side, it was complex and counterintuitive, but then on the other side, it was and is so simple. And what's interesting is all my life, right, at least in the last 23 years of engaging with this thing and saying, how do I do this life well? I'm sure you probably asked the same question. You're looking at self-help stuff, you're looking at all these different things like, how do I get an edge? How do I get an advantage? All these kind of things. And when something is true, it resonates. When you ring a bell, and it just resonates. That it's pure and it's true. And I think I've been knocking on all kinds of things. You think about a mallet on a bell, right? I'm knocking on the wall. I'm knocking on money. I'm knocking on cars. I'm knocking on relationships, and seeing which thing will resonate as true. And here I am, in crypto, and you're like, it's amazing to me that Steve was sent to me at a Texan meetup, and he was just doing what he was called to do. I said, "Hey, I'm Matt." And he's like, "I'm Steve." I said, "I'm called to unlock global generosity." And he says, "I'm called to men of the transfer." I'm like, "What the heck is that?" And then 2 years later, basically understanding this, and he's gone. And it's like, all right, I don't think a lot of people in our culture realize that you're here for a very specific reason and purpose. And part of this thing that I think it's so brilliant that God chose Steve as a professional baseball player. And he basically fashioned him. And there's no better example that I can see in my life of somebody that was so disciplined and so focused, but followed this calling. It's like he loved baseball. And, to the point where every waking moment he thought about baseball. And then he said he found himself in the middle of, roaring fans. He crossed the chalk and he walked out there and he's like, is this it? And it's amazing that this journey of an experience like that everything you've ever done is going to be relevant in the next thing that you do. And I saw that with Steve. I see that in my own life. And I hope you see that in your life. David was approaching Goliath, right? Everybody was afraid. Oh no, he's so big and so tall. And the smallest of all the brothers literally goes up and he's like, I'll take him on. And they're like, what? We're all afraid. Why is this little boy, And he's like, I fought the lion and the bear. Well, why do you think you've gone through these challenges all your life? Because you fought the lion and the bear. And these things not only build character, but they're a part of informing what you're to do next and how you're going to have the skills and capabilities to handle those things when you walk with him. And that's what I saw in Steve. And I see in my own life is that understanding who you are and understanding what God has created, but understanding that without him, you can do nothing. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean you can do with him? Right. And that's the thing that I feel like there's so little, when we think about, we know that discipleship is important. This idea of, older men training other folks or having, peer relationships or doing something like this where we just share wisdom and message and all that, is having people in your life that you can essentially engage with these things with to say, hey, am I on the right track or what are you seeing? And I got a buddy, Ray, who does that for me. Do you have somebody like that? Do you have somebody who, when you're dealing with difficult stuff is saying, hey, remember, we do this with Jesus and what is his perspective in this? And, it says in the scriptures that that's iron sharpening iron, right? This idea that, hey, we work together. It also says that a cord of three strands is strong, but it also talks about walking in community with others so that if you fall in a pit, somebody can like reach down and help you out. And my buddy Ray reached down and helped me out of a pit this morning. And then my buddy Steve spoke to me through this message, which is absolutely dynamite. But let me share with you, I want to recap a couple things Steve said because it's so huge to me, is that there's this invitation. Jesus is inviting us to be inside and have his perspective in this storm of life. In this life, it's probably no better analogy or metaphor for life than a storm. And to have him share this picture of literally Jesus standing in the midst of this whirlwind and that we can stand with him, right? Well, that's having his perspective, but walking with him. And you're like, okay, I want my life to be on more of a straight path than, this one where I'm bumping into the sides. But what's really interesting is he said, regardless of how you see things or how you're wired, there's your yes is your yes and your no is your no. And he talked about how, I didn't really understand that when I read it. It seems really practical. However, he's like, I asked him, I said, is this really what you meant by this? And Jesus revealed more. And in that is the practice that he has taught me. Hey, I don't really understand this. Hey, Jesus, how do you see this? Rather than saying, well, maybe one day I will. No, I want to understand it now. And what did Jesus say when they chased after him and asked him, hey, what do you mean by the agricultural story? And he says, because you chased after me. He called them the ecclesia, the called out ones. That's the term for church, by the way. Isn't that amazing? That's really the practice of this, is that we would seek him and we'd say, hey, what'd you think about this? But if you don't believe that Jesus is alive and he speaks, none of this stuff is relevant, right? You're like, well, we're just kind of on our own and all I've got is this book. The book ain't going to save you, folks. Jesus is alive and he speaks. And you're like, hold on. So I could walk with him. And for him to tell me, he's like, I'm the God of the quantum. Like, we do this together. I mean, even to the point where you look at the detector, right? You look at this double slit experiment and the waveform collapses when you look at it. And you're like, wow, you created us in your image. This co-creation event that we're doing in life together with you is where life exists. And he said two things. He said, your yes is to empower so as to mobilize. Think about that. When you say yes to something, you empower to mobilize it. And your no is to protect, and you rule over it with your no. So let your yes empower and mobilize. Let your no protect and rule. And if you think about this, when you start putting these pieces together and you're like, well, why did you create? I created so that my man would rule and reign with me in the fullness of my nature and character. Wow. What does that look like? And you know what's amazing is it's amazing. I met a doctor years ago and he was a Christian guy. And he literally said to me, he goes, you know what? What if we're wrong? That's what he said to me. He's like, what if we're wrong? And I was like, hey, that's a really good question. What if we're wrong? He goes, you know what's funny about this though? When you follow Jesus and you literally follow him, everyone likes that. Isn't that interesting? Like, look around you. The people that are actually following Jesus, and I don't mean the hypocritical people. I don't consider them following Jesus. The judgmental ones, the ones that are correcting you all the time. It's interesting. The people that are actually following Jesus and walking with him, they're like Steve. And you're like, I like being around people. Why? They're gentle, they're kind, they're patient, they're thoughtful, they're self-controlled. They're exhibiting all of these behaviors that are like, I want to aspire to be like that. And it's interesting. Wouldn't you like it if the people that were ruling, were in charge of things, did it in a nature and character that was seeking after literally the author and perfecter of the creator of the whole thing? Well, that's the picture of the kingdom of God, is that we would understand and come back to him and literally say, all right, not your will, not my will, but your will. And to think that we're being attacked, that if you're actually in the game, right? If you're actually in the game, you're a threat to him. He wants to take you out. So, in a way, consider it pure joy when facing troubles of many kinds, because it's in this contrast that you understand and see who I am, and that you understand that I stand in the midst of the storm, and you can stand with me. This is more valuable than P die pegging to $1, by the way. This is real wisdom, folks. And it's not from me and it's not from Steve. It's directly from the creator of the universe. And I think about what is his vision for this future. And it's like he taught us to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, holy be your name. So there is one supreme being over all things. Your kingdom come. It's not here right now, right? We see glimpses of it. Your kingdom come, your will be done. Your will, not ours, not mine. Your will be done. Where? On earth as it is in heaven. It's a picture. It's the whole like mission statement in the way he taught us to pray. And you're like, wow. What if I align myself with the very creation? And it's funny, like the farmer does it, right? Think about you're a farmer. Got the hayseed in your mouth, got your suspenders, or you're wearing your bib overalls. I can see Mr. Ray wearing his bib overalls with a hayseed in his mouth. Maybe we have like a hat to keep the sun off his head. And he goes out into the field and he plants some corn. He takes one little kernel of corn, digs out the thing, puts it in there, covers it up, and he goes, "Thank you, Jesus." He doesn't germinate the seed. He doesn't create the warmth. He doesn't create the soil. He doesn't create the sun, and he doesn't create the rain. And what does he do? He sits back and he goes, "You know what? I'm going to wait on the Lord." And what ends up happening? Sprout, sprout, sprout. What he did not do, but he partnered with the creation by breaking open the earth, putting that seed in there. And he stood back and he said, "All right, I'm going to partner with you in this." And when we look around at this abundant creation that we have, and it's amazing, and this is only one analogy, and there's like a gazillion of them, what you end up doing is you are literally delaying your gratification, because you could have eaten that corn, right? You could have ground up that corn and made it into cornmeal, but you didn't. You said, "I'm going to delay my gratification, and I'm going to experience a harvest." And I did a little research on corn, and there's like 2 or 3 heads or ears of corn on a stalk. And there are like 18 rows of kernels on each ear. And so I did the math, and it's like 1600 to 1. That's the ratio. And I just think about crypto all the time, right? I'm like, man, I want to have my 10x, my 100x, my 1000x, my 10,000x. Did you know the creation, what God created, actually is abundant? Yeah, one kernel of corn in the system, if you're willing to wait on him and partner with him, you don't create the pieces that make it work. Now, you can add water and you can put it in a greenhouse. There's things that you can do, but you have to align yourself with the creation. You don't just go, poof, I got corn. You delay your gratification, and what do you have? A harvest that is abundant, and it is 1600 to 1. And that's basically the fundamentals of everything in the natural system. And that's part of the contrast of us knowing that it's not the way it's supposed to be. That's why we know this ain't heaven, folks, because the people in this there's one in the heavenly realms that is an adversary who's saying, "You are the most important thing. You need to go your own way. You don't need to follow anyone else. You need to follow me," right? You need to get yours at everyone else's expense. You need to extract. You need to hoard. You need to do these things. And it's like, no, I don't. Because why Jesus as a person and his message is so controversial is because it's so counterintuitive. You go, wow. So the kingdom of heaven is actually made up of us. And Steve said to me, he said, "Was the kingdom near when Jesus was here?" I'm like, yeah, I guess it was. The kingdom of heaven is near. We see glimpses of this all the time. And I think part of this experience in community together is a part of that. You see these flashes of just absolute beauty. But you also see the flip side of this. And if we think about this is the product of us going our own way. And so what would it look like? Steve often asks me, he goes, "Hey, Matt, what would it look like if you ran Texas?" And I kind of thought about that. And I was like, well, one, I'm pretty well aware that I'm not capable of doing it on my own. Well, that's a pretty good place to start from. Well, I feel the same way about my family, my home, and my marriage, and my business, and my crypto, and this channel, and my friendships. And it's almost like that's where God needed to put me in a situation where I got nothing. Because I used to be so confident in my own capabilities, right? Resting like on my own understandings. And it's amazing how it's like Jesus turned me inside out, like reaching into a bag and grabbing it and turn it directly inside out. And you go, wow. And that's, I think, why it says you're a new creation in him. Because you align yourself with that. And you think about it, it's very practical. I think the idea of like, well, this Jesus guy, is he living in my heart? How does that work? And that's kind of like this churchy way of saying something. Well, Steve made the gospel so much more accessible because he said, hey, this Jesus guy, which people are telling you is this historical figure that, is essentially dead and you need to worship this book that was written about him. He said, no, that guy's alive, right? And he even talked about the Spirit of God being sent so that it would remind you of everything he said. And then you start reviewing this book and you're like, dang, this stuff's good. But what I realized is this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's an intro. Like the church is an onboarding, the Bible's an intro, but it's an invitation for you to go deep with him. And how do you go deep with someone who's not alive? And how do you go deep with someone who's not speaking and listening? I mean, what a gift. What a gift, the message of Steve Sachs, that really understanding who Jesus is. You're not alone. You're not the descendant of a monkey. Folks, let's bring in my buddy. This is the guy who sharpens my iron, if you know what I'm saying. Ladies and gentlemen, back by popular demand, the guest of the hour, the man, the myth, the legend, ZZ Tesco himself. What's up? Dude, you're
Oh,
there you go. I need to see more of your head, dude. You have a good head. Ray, what do you think of all that stuff? I know you've been in there in the green room. You saw me this morning. I was just like blown up. I was not in a good place. And then to have you share what you shared with me and then to like fat finger and find that message from Steve, it's exactly what I needed to hear. Isn't that crazy?
I can't tell you.
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been in conversations and Jesus will call something to my mind that I needed, that it's exactly what I needed to hear, and even to the point where, just listening to Steve talking about, taking us out of the, being in the game,
Yeah.
how easy it is for ourselves to take ourselves out of the game. And yeah, we leave the ports open, or our emotions just go all over the place, and we listen to the lies that get told to us, and it keeps us from being effective.
Steve said, and I wrote this down. I put a banner up when he said it, and I still have it saved here. He said, "Decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest." And I made him say that again, and I'm like, oh my, that is like one of the most brilliant, pithy statements I've ever heard. We make these decisions in our life. And, I told you that story this morning of how difficult my morning was, and I let my emotions rule. And what he's basically saying is you have the decision, and that decision it is like a seed that creates a harvest. And sometimes the harvest ain't the harvest you want. You know what I'm saying? Like you've let your emotions rule. And it's like, well, this real time, moment by moment walking with Jesus is a straighter path. But his picture of the whirlwind, around Jesus, it's interesting to say, if all things were made for him and by him, Ray, then evil is the absence of truth. It's this contrast that you need to see. So when he says, consider it pure joy, brothers, when facing troubles of many kinds, oh my God, hold on. I think these as troubles. He says, no, consider them pure joy. Why? Because it's the contrast that shows us the beauty and the holiness of Jesus. It's like a daily reminder of it. And I look at that and I'm like, wow, you do want to make my path straight. And you do love me. And you do have a role for me. And you do have a purpose. And I'm like, this is the treasure in a field, Ray. It's not crypto, it's Jesus. A man finds a treasure in a field. He goes out, he's so joyful that he sells everything he has and buys that field. And I think about this,
Yeah.
what would it look like, Ray, if all of these people that are going to find themselves in abundance financially were literally making their decisions in the nature and character of the one who created it all? The implications are amazing. That's literally the kingdom of God. It's just so great, Ray. I just don't know.
It
what to
is.
say.
It
Oh,
is great. I mean, I don't even know what I could add to that.
isn't that
Other
amazing,
than
dude?
the fact that I mess it up. I mess it up all the time. So, and if you guys are out there like me, you're thinking to yourself, how do I do that? Because I let all these things come in. Oh, the pressure of this thing, this wasn't right. Right? James 4 is like you kill and covet because you don't get what you want.
Yeah,
And I'm like, that's the story of my life. I want it,
I want it now.
and I want it now.
Isn't
But
it
then
cool to have? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that there's peace in saying people talk about being centered, and there's no greater joy than to be centered on Jesus because he helps you understand how all the pieces fit together in your life, when he's the center of everything. But was it you or Steve that just said it? It was when you're not the center, or no, wait, when you're in the center, the enemy doesn't have to worry. When you move out of the way and Jesus is in the center, now you got problems.
You're a threat.
Well, you're a threat. That's what it was. No
Yeah,
problem.
and you know what's so cool? You said it earlier. Is like, what does it mean to be in the game, right? And I love that analogy. And here Steve is this baseball player, and you've played sports, and I've played sports, and we know the difference between being in the stands and watching a game versus playing it. It's very, very different. And if we use that metaphor for everyone, right? Are you in the game or are you not? And what I love about that is Steve just said, hey, are you interested? If you're interested, well, you're going to be in the game, right? You're learning the rules of the game. You're learning how to play the game, and you're going to have a role in the game. But you also have a choice. And that's one of the beautiful things about God's creation is he allows you to have that choice. And you can choose not to be in the game. And if you think about this, people have made choices in their lives that have taken them out of the game. And I don't want to use the term game as if it's not, that it's trivial. It's not trivial at all. But illustrating this point that when you make Jesus the center of things, you become a threat to the enemy. But understand the enemy does not have standing unless you give it to him, meaning you have the authority over your own decision making. And your yes is to empower, is to mobilize, and your no is to protect. And it's amazing, and to rule. And you think about that. Well, what does it mean to rule and reign? We rule over the things that we have to protect against, and we reign over the things that are good. And you think about that and you're like, wow, this idea of blessing and protecting people, well, it's a part of being in the game. And I think about that, I think about what is the church? What is what is the ecclesia? Well, I think we've defined it as, well, it's this denomination. No, there are people all across the world, literally all across the world, that are basically saying, hey, Jesus, what did you think of? How do you see this? What is this perspective? And to think that he would have so many different people from different places with different experiences, and that's the body, has many parts and many purposes. And it's like, I really hope that this message and Steve's message is one in which you examine yourself in light of the fact that you're not an accident. There's so many people who are so discouraged, and their lives are built up on like whether crypto's going up or not. And it's like you can have peace amidst the storm. But I think almost, and tell me what you think of this, Ray. It makes the joy that much more sweet. When you do find yourself in abundance, it's like you, on one hand, don't get to enjoy it as much, but on the other hand, it's sweeter than it could have been when you think, look what I have created.
And the master of uncomfortable silence.
No, yeah, it's so great, right? It's like, I almost like it's just got to sit there and ring because it's so true. Ugh.
Yeah, I get thinking about it, and then I'm like, wow, yeah, I could see how that would work.
It's
The thing that I
amazing.
appreciate about what Steve brings is he kind of defines some of the terms that we use all the time that um, we don't always understand the meaning or the depth of what they could mean. And so we end up like living in this kind of shallow area up here. Oh yeah, yes, no, yes, no, no, yes, yes, maybe. And yet Steve is saying, no, 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 no. Let's define these terms. What does yes mean? When you say yes, what does that mean? You know, um, and we also don't have the perspective that we're here in this context, and there's a thousand angels on the other side, ready to do the things that Jesus wants them to do in the nature of character of Him, ready to go. In sometimes on our behalf, sometimes doing things for us, sometimes protecting us from things, like all the things that Jesus wants them to do. You know, that in just that one moment of decision between a yes or a no, we don't always get the implications of that. And it seems like when you think about it as the no is to protect. What am I protecting? Well, then I have something valuable to protect. You know, if I have something valuable to protect, who says it's valuable? Well,
Mm.
Jesus does, right? Or yes, to empower somebody to go. So when my wife asks me a question, hey, should I go do this? And I say yes, I'm empowering her to do what God has put it in her heart to do. And she's excited about it because I'm not standing in the way of saying no. I have to protect my pride, and I have to be the guy that thought of it first. I'm like, no.
Yeah. Well, it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others in addition to yourself. Each of you should look to not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. And you think about that, you know, you're giving this, it's grace. And you think about that as leaders in whatever form or fashion you find yourself, whatever authority you find yourself in. And it's just like everything Steve ever said, Ray, all these things, right? Like that banner I just put up, right? Decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest. All of these things that we've heard from Steve, he was like, I had to go ask Jesus how he saw this stuff. And I think, what gives me so much hope is that here's a lifetime of a guy doing this, right? At least 40 years. Steve just said, hey, I took him everywhere I went and I asked him every time, what do you see? How do you see this? If this is the kind of wisdom that comes from Jesus, it's confirmation of its truth because it's in alignment with the scriptures, but it's also true, but it's like more true. Why? Because it didn't come from a man. You know what I love about Steve? And Steve said this too, is like, there's so many people out there that are basically using this wisdom, using this ability to communicate, using these things to gain value and resource. Right. And I think about that, like, it's the typical one is, um, you know, Trump selling Bibles, right? Right. Trying to raise money with Jesus, essentially. And I think about, prosperity gospel people who are like, come buy the prayer cloth. And here's a guy, Steve, humble, people that were interested, they asked him and he spent time with them. And it wasn't an exploitation, just was as true. And it's almost right modeled in the nature of who Jesus was. He literally, when he was here on the planet, he exercised in a way that basically goes, you have a choice. He's like, "Follow me." The rich young ruler wasn't happy about that idea, right? He's like, "Yeah, I followed everything," but he's like, "Well, sell everything you got and follow me." And he's like, it's too much. And I think so many of us are thinking, "Oh no, what will we lose?" Not realizing what we would gain. And that's really all I can do is just say, "Hey, there's a lot to gain here." But you don't gain anything unless you're interested. And it's not like, well, you got to go through this like, well, you need to be a Lutheran. No, 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 no. You just need to be interested. It's so good, and it's exactly what I needed to hear, and of course, you, unlike everybody else that's watching this, saw me when I walked in this morning to the office, and I so appreciate your friendship, Ray. It's like I fell into a pit and you helped me out.
Well,
Thank you.
I appreciate being in that position. And to be honest, yesterday it was me. You
It
know,
was. I did lift you out of the pit yesterday. Folks, you need friends like Ray. You need friends in your life, and hopefully we can be that to you, I mean, as much as we can with this communication method. We do have a Telegram channel called Right Side Up if you wanna join that. Um And it's just, I'm very, very thankful. Very, very thankful for Steve, his life, what he modeled, how he invested in me. And I hope that this gets passed along through his message and, just living this life out. But I will say this. It's it's supernatural. And it is a true partnership. And the coolest thing about this is every moment in every situation Jesus is concerned with. And is available, right? Available to whatever. He's attentive to your every, interest and inquiry, and that gives me so much hope because I feel like the world is about to change dramatically, and I think remember 9/11, Ray? Remember when everybody like rushed into churches because they didn't know which way was up? We're coming
yeah,
into a period of that time again, and it's like, isn't it cool? He's like the most decentralized thing in the universe. He's like, I gotta go and I'm gonna send you one that'll remind you of everything I said. Isn't that so cool? Like
yeah.
the Jesus story, like he is decentralized in the spirit of God and that you have access to him 24/7 and you can literally do it with him moment by moment. And here's a guy, Steve, who like demonstrated that for me. And I'm just like, I want to be like that. And that's good, by the way. That's what makes it good news. It's like, yeah, everybody wants somebody that's gonna be loving and kind and thoughtful and generous and good and self-controlled, so
But you know what's amazing to me, and I think about this in a matter of completeness that, and I don't always act this way because there's so many decisions that I just make on my own that I don't ask Jesus what his perspective is or what he wants out of the situation. And I'm the inconsistent one. He's the consistent one. And I like the knowing what the rules are, you know? Like, so if I go and I ask Jesus about something, is he just going to take it away from me because he's a big thumb that likes to do that? Is he just going to squash me? You think about gaining the trust of a cat, right? The cat will come up to you, and if you pet it and be nice, then maybe it'll come back next time, but it's going to take a while. I guarantee you, though, if the cat comes up to you and you punt and you smack him in the face, he's not coming back because the cat. But I kind of treat Jesus that way. Like, okay, well, if I ask Jesus what he wants, he's going to give me something I hate, or he's going to make it so uncomfortable for me that I can't do what I want. So I don't even ask him about these decisions. The thing that I like that's complete with Jesus, though, is he says, you can take every thought captive and every no be no, every yes be yes, and every decision that you have to make, I can do it with you. And it's not contingent upon, like, I'm not just going to pick and choose to be good to you this time and then kind of poke you in the side next time or take away your cheese, or
yeah.
move your cheese around and make it difficult for you just to be a punk. Jesus will never do that. It's always, I am truth, I am goodness, everything that I do is good, so what is it that we can do together? And even when I mess up in the past and I messed up, made wrong decisions, and I come back, Jesus, I'm sorry for that decision that I made. I take responsibility for it. I own it. I ask forgiveness because I'm sorry. He goes, okay, well, what do you want to do next? And I'm like, okay. And my emotions are still like, you piece of crap,
Yeah.
you can't do it. But whatever decision is next, he wants to help me do it. And I'm honored and amazed to be part of it.
Well,
So
and
thanks for friends
yeah.
too, like you, that can help remind me of those things.
Well, and if you daisy chain that stuff together, I mean, you think about the implications of it. And that's the thing that I think is, for those who are just more practical about things, try it on for size, right? That's the thing that I think is so interesting is, you know, I remember, back September 10th of 2000 was really this first time I genuinely said, all right, Jesus, if you got the goods, I'm in. And he literally showed me his power, like literally lifted weight off my back. And it was like this moment of going, all right. And I almost feel like I felt a lot like Paul on the road to Damascus, right? He's blinded, right? And spoken to by Jesus. Oh, by the way, that's a living Jesus who speaks, by the way. And he spoke to him and he's like, all right. And what did he end up devoting his life to? He was killing Christians. And the next thing you know, he's literally walking around the Mediterranean, shipwrecked on Malta on the way to Rome. Like he literally was in jail. It's amazing stories. And it's like, that's the thing. You're like, well, what was I made for? And to think that you're on like this mission, we're on a mission from God. And it's like, yeah, no, you are. And that's the kingdom. And I think what's really interesting is this temporary thing, experience my dad's death and Steve's death. And, like, wow, it's so short.
Yeah.
And that's what reminds me of this. Do not store up your treasures here on earth. How do you store up your treasures in heaven? I want big bags of diamond hands, man. When Lambo. But it's like, hold on, the things that are eternal, you can store them up in heaven. Well, what is that? That's while you're here. Let's hold every thought captive. Let's follow him and let's see the straightened path. Well, what is the straightened path? And to think that the decisions that we make, and it's as simple as like, all right, what decisions you making at home? What decisions you make in your work? What decisions you're making in your friendships? What decisions are you making with money or whatever it may be? It's like having that counselor, right? And going, all right, so you're going to make my path straight. I feel like, Ray, just to be admitting to you, I feel like I've only given Jesus the big stuff that I thought were important to him. And what he said to me very recently is, no, I'm the God of the quantum. I'm meaning as small as you can possibly get to, I'm there. That means that there's nothing I miss and that there's no, picosecond that I'm not present. And you go, so you're actually concerned about these things? And that's the thing that's so cool. It's like, you don't have to believe me. Try it on for size. You'll see. And that's the thing that's amazing to me. It's like, he'll prove himself to you because he is the way, the truth, and life. And it's like, honestly, Ray, I never thought I would ever say those words because I was so against this whole thing. And it's amazing. Like that's the proof of the power. It's like, all right. So thanks so much, Ray, for coming in and sharing your thoughts. And thank
No,
you,
I'm
Steve. And
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really neat is I really appreciate the community of all of you guys that are here listening and being part of this.
131 right now, by the way, right? 131.
We need to probably do some more meetups in the future, but I'm not the strategy marketing guy.
Let's do it. Let's get together. High five. Oh my gosh. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
See you, man. All right, that wraps up episode 47, emotional damage. Boy, man, I'm prone to wander and prone to create damage. And you think about it. If you're in the game, be ready for it. I literally, the things I've been saying now is like, Jesus, only you have the authority to speak to me, and Satan, you have no standing here. Those are good things to memorize. Only you have the authority to speak to me, Jesus. Satan, you have no standing here, and it will flee from you. Like you have the authority. Because if the spirits of darkness were so strong, they would have killed us by now. They don't have that. They can only use the authority we give them because we are an extension of him. We are sons and daughters of God. We are heirs, as Steve would say, We are of the class of the Elohim. Folks, thanks for joining today. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. And this is Right Side Up, honoring Steve Staggs. Take care of yourself and do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.